God's eyes are always on Israel. From Genesis to Revelation, the scriptures consistently affirm that the God of Israel has placed his name, his presence, and his covenantal love upon the land and people of Israel. The phrase, his eyes are always on it, written in Deuteronomy 11:12, is not an isolated statement, but a recurring theme, echoed throughout the prophets, the Psalms, the historical writings, and reaffirmed in the New Testament. This teaching will trace this theme through the Bible, showing that God's attention to Israel is perpetual, unwavering, and central to his redemptive plan for the world. Let's study the Holy Land and city of his name. From the very beginning, God distinguished Israel as the place where his presence would dwell forever. Deuteronomy 11:12 proclaims that the land of Israel is uniquely cared for by the Lord. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. This sets Israel apart as the center of his earthly concern. 1 Kings 9:3 even declares God's response to Solomon's prayer at the temple dedication. My eyes and heart will always be there. His name, his heart, and his gaze rest forever on Jerusalem. Likewise, 2 Kings 21:4 and 2 Chronicles 33:4 stress that in Jerusalem God placed his name forever. Thus, Zion is not just one holy site among many, but the dwelling place of the Lord of heaven and earth. Next, we will discuss God's jealous love over Zion. The prophets reveal God's deep passion and protective love for Jerusalem. Isaiah 31:4-5 describes the Lord descending like a lion and hovering like a bird to protect Zion. In protecting it, he will rescue it. In sparing it, he will save it. Zechariah 1:14-17 declares that God is very jealous for Jerusalem and Zion and promises to again choose her and fill her with prosperity. Zechariah 2:8 makes the intimate statement, whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. These verses show that God's attention to Israel is not passive, but active, protective, and jealous. And speaking of jealousy, even Zechariah 8:2-4 declares, this is what the Lord Almighty says, I am very jealous for Zion. I am burning with jealousy for her. I will return to Zion and dwell in Jerusalem. Then Jerusalem will be called the faithful city, and the mountain of the Lord Almighty will be called the holy mountain. Next, we will examine Zion as the eternal dwelling of God's glory. The Psalms and prophets further affirm that Zion is the chosen throne of God. Psalm 132, verses 13-14 says, for the Lord has chosen Zion. This is my resting place forever and ever. Psalm 48:2 and Psalm 87:2 exalt the beauty and priority of Zion, calling it God's holy mountain and the city he loves above all others. Even Ezekiel 43:6-7 reveals the divine voice declaring, this is the place of my throne. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever. Jerusalem is not temporary, it is eternal, the earthly reflection of God's throne and glory. Let's examine Israel's security and restoration. Though Israel often felt abandoned, the prophets remind us of God's unfailing remembrance. Isaiah 49:14-16 gives God's answer to Zion's cry of abandonment. I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are always before me. Isaiah 62:1-7 calls for unceasing prayer until Jerusalem becomes a praise in the earth, with salvation shining like a torch. Jeremiah 3:17 foresees the day when Jerusalem will be called the throne of the Lord, and all nations will gather there. The restoration of Zion is not optional. It is guaranteed by the eternal covenant promises of God. Next, let's analyze the Davidic covenant in Messiah's reign. God's covenant with David also anchors his watchfulness over Israel. Psalm 89:30-37 declares that though Israel may face discipline, God will not take my love from her, nor will I ever betray my faithfulness. David's line and throne will endure forever. Psalm 2:6-8 shows the Messiah, God's Son, installed on Zion, inheriting the nations. Isaiah 28:16 promises a cornerstone laid in Zion, the Messiah himself, the sure foundation. Thus, the Messiah's throne, located in Jerusalem, ties God's eternal plan to Israel's destiny. Next, we must study the New Testament continuity. The New Testament clearly affirms this unbroken promise. Matthew 5:35 calls Jerusalem the city of the great king. Acts 3:25 reminds Israel of their covenantal role. You are the sons of the prophets. By your seed, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Romans 11:1-2, 26-29, stresses that God has not cast away his people. They are beloved for the sake of the fathers, for the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. It even claims that someday in the future, all Israel will be saved. Even the book of Revelation, chapters 7 and 14, highlight the 144 Jews of the tribes of Israel sealed and gathered around the Messiah on Mount Zion, the Temple Mount, showing God's eyes fixed on his covenant people even in the last days. Thus, the New Testament does not replace Israel, but confirms her role in God's unfolding plan of redemption. Finally, we will examine the global significance of God's eye on Israel. Because God's eyes are always on Israel, the destiny of all nations is intertwined with Zion. As Zechariah 2:11-12 proclaims, many nations will join themselves to the Lord in that day, but God will still inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land, and will once again choose Jerusalem. The restoration of Israel leads to the blessing of the nations, fulfilling God's covenant promise to Abraham, as Genesis 12:3 declares. Conclusion. The testimony of Scripture, from Torah to the prophets, from Psalms to the New Testament, is unified. God's eyes, his heart, and his name are eternally fixed upon Israel and Jerusalem. Though the nations rage, though Israel experiences discipline, God's covenant stands firm. Zion is his resting place forever, the apple of his eye, and the throne of his Messiah. To understand God's purposes in history is to understand his ongoing concern for Israel. The restoration of Jerusalem is not just about one nation. It is about the revelation of God's glory to the whole earth. Truly, his eyes are always on Israel,